seem at times to be intimidated by a British accent. Aren't we all? I'm not. Hello, welcome to volume 19 of Ask a Brit. That's right, volume 19. There are officially now more Ask a Brit episodes than there are Police Academy films. So we're really making tracks. And you know the format. If you have a question for me, go ahead and leave it in the comments below using the hashtag AskABrit, just like Mr. Stephen Nolte, who is first up today. And Stephen asks, only recently discovered your videos, loving them, thank you. I live in Liverpool, England. Love Liverpool, been there many a time, not a bad word to say about it. What negative and positive differences have you found and experienced with the UK's and US's different healthcare systems? Oh my, touchy subject to start with, right? Well, there are some vast differences, obviously. The United States doesn't run on a socialised healthcare system, unlike the NHS. So, you know, when people walk into hospital, people like to point out that I leave off the before hospital. Then in England, of course, they don't go there expecting to get a bill at the end of it. The taxes have already covered that, or national insurance contributions have already helped to cover the cost. And so in many ways that's very daunting. I remember Tara, my wife, had a cardiac arrest a few years ago, and we had to take her to hospital. You know, the ambulance ride, firstly, was like a taxi ride, but a $3,000 taxi ride. And then, you know, we got a bill sometime down the line for $120,000. So that was quite overwhelming, I would say, and it's the last thing you need, I suppose, when, you know, you've just been through cardiac arrest, is to see something like that. I will say, as somebody that grew up with the NHS, that if you were to ask me which I prefer, I would definitely every time say the NHS, because, I mean, studies have been done on this, that you know, per person we pay considerably less than people do in the United States, and the quality of healthcare is comparable, if not better. What do I find positive about the American healthcare system? I suppose they no longer discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions like used to happen. So that's good. Right, we're getting there. Next question comes from Jacob Fye, and Jacob asks, do you miss how New Year's Eve is celebrated, and if so, what do you miss? Also, what do you think of Big Ben not chiming for 4 years? Well, to answer the second question first, I think sometimes you've got to have a break, right? And that's what Big Ben is thinking, or her overlords. Is Ben a woman? I've decided she is. And so I think some time off for some well-needed maintenance is fine. I'll put it with that. In fact, you know, at New Year, they could just dub in the sounds. Just go to freesounds.com and find some church bells. You'll be fine. It's not a church. I recognise that. And in fact, the bell is very distinctive. But hey, you know, find a comedy sound and it'll make New Year even funnier than it already is. Is New Year funny? It's enjoyable. Do I miss it being celebrated in the UK? You know, I think on the whole, Big Ben aside, New Year here isn't all that different, I suppose. But in America, we celebrate the dropping of a big ball, which sounds really dirty, as does Big Ben. Put the two together, what have you got? Construction is what you've got. Okay, next question comes from Tiffany, and Tiffany says, regarding your quest to visit all of the US states, I was wondering how you plan to decide where to go and what to see in each one. The decision of where to go is based around our budget, so the more pledges we have at patreon.com/lostinthepond, quick plug, the further we feel we can go on this journey. Right now we have enough, we feel, to get us to most places in the Midwest, maybe just south of the Midwest, Kentucky. That video is coming up soon. But to get to the states outside of the Midwest and on the far coast as well, we need to raise considerably more. So if you would like to see my videos go out west, go out east, go south, go north, go to your neck of the woods, then why not pledge today? This feels like an infomercial. Tiffany, I know you already have, so thank you for that. But that's the plan in terms of financing. So we're basically going to spread out as funding grows. And in terms of deciding on what we want to see in each state, a lot of that comes from your suggestions. So again, you know, I've been keeping a spreadsheet up of all of your suggestions, and I'm trying to get to a lot of them. I know that a few months ago, a number of you recommended in Ohio, for example, the National Museum of the United States Air Force. Well, we did in fact go there, and there's a video coming out this week on that very thing. So we want your suggestions as to where to go, is what I'm saying, and I'll try my best to get to these places and bring you videos on them, and that's what this is all about. So next question then comes from D. Sherwood. D asks, why do Brits say Z instead of Z? Well, I don't know that the burden of accountability is on Brits. It's not just us that say Z, it is indeed the Australians, the New Zealanders, South Africans, and anyone else in the English-speaking world, I think, except for perhaps Americans, who, of course, as you say Z. But it goes back to Greek, I think. The initial Greek pronunciation then morphed into French, Old French, which was, I think, Zede or Zeda, or however they would have pronounced it, which then morphed into what we Brits now know as Z, and Americans say Z, presumably because, you say B, you say C, you say E, you say D, you say F. No, never mind. So I think it sort of was to help follow a pattern, perhaps, which, fair play. Like I said, I'm fine with both. The funny one, though, is how you pronounce certain words that have Z in it. So zebra, I would say, zebra crossing, and you'd say zebra crossing. No, you wouldn't. You'd say crosswalk. It's confusing all around. Next question comes from Firecracker3240, who asks, what other hobbies do you have outside of travelling the US? I don't have any other hobbies outside of travelling the US. That's all I do with my life. No, I'm kidding. Composing music is high on my list of hobbies. You'll have noticed, actually, some of them feature in my Finding America videos. Thankfully, this voice does not. And just sort of having fun with life. Is that a hobby? I don't know. That's just a sort of a state, isn't it, of being. I like to draw. I like to read. I like to walk. I like to go cycling. They're my top 5 things. Top 5 things to do. Thank you for that question. And next question comes from Nikki7831. Other than the Star Spangled Banner, do you know of any of the other songs about America, such as God Bless America, America the Beautiful, and God Bless the USA? Yes, I do. There's American Pie by Don McLean, not to be confused with John McClane from Die Hard. But I do know the ones you mentioned as well. Don't get me to sing them. Nobody wants that. Angela, my friend, asks, have you been watching the new series of the Great British Bake Off? If so, what are your thoughts? If not, you should still. It's fab, and Noel Fielding is a hilarious presenter. I don't doubt it. I've not seen it yet. I don't really have easy access to Channel 4, where the show has moved to. It was previously on, of course, the BBC. I don't know, the wife is more into that show than I am, but I'll often watch it in the background. It'd be strange to see, though, without Sue and Mel and Sue. Shane Donlan, you're up next. Do they have fish and chip shops in the USA like the ones in the UK? You know what, Shane? They don't really. I mean, there will be some novel exceptions, I'll grant you. But for the most part, it is hard to find a fish and chip shop. It's not hard to find fish and chips. You can find that in your local pub, as it were. It's usually on the menu. But as has been stated before, they're not quite the same as you would get back home. So the fish, not that I eat it, that has to be a disclaimer, I used to, is a bit different and usually comes in smaller segments. And the chips are just fries, usually, what you'd think of as French fries, not greasy, bulky, soggy chips, which I miss with all my heart and my stomach. Mainly that. And mushy peas are very hard to find, as has been stated before. Also, Scootaloo, closer to home, have you been to the museums in Chicago yet, such as the Adler Planetarium or the Field Museum or even the Museum of Science and Industry? I have, I'll get to that in a second. And did you know that the Field Museum is home to the world's largest and complete T-Rex skeleton ever discovered? And it's called Sue. I do. That's not an affirmation to a marriage proposal. Not that I received one. Apart from my wife. No, I did the proposing. So to answer your question, I've been to all of those museums, and Sue is a lovely, lovely dinosaur, platonically speaking, of course. And I love Adler Planetarium. I think it's my favourite place in Chicago ever. We went there a few years ago when we were tourists, and we sat back in this sort of thing, right? We leaned back and they just made us look up at the stars. Not the actual stars, but it was laid out as if it was. It was really cool. And I remember this guy asked the entire room, what's the largest planet in the solar system? And I was like, Jupiter! Oh, I meant to put my hand up. And let the children answer, because it's a kid's thing. So... Okay, next up, Joni Neal. Joni asks, we have many different types of natural disasters in the US. Yes, we do. Such as Harvey and other hurricanes and tornadoes, wildfires, earthquakes, landslides and floods. Does the British Isles have any in comparison? Have you experienced any here or there? The British Isles doesn't have anything on the extreme level that the United States has. All of the things you mentioned, I think. When it's hurricane season, of course, such as now, when we're seeing the devastation down in Florida from Hurricane Irma, or indeed in Texas with Harvey, it's incredibly rare for us to see anything on that level. I mean, it's terrifying, and my heart truly does, all joking aside, go out to the people down there in the Gulf and in the Caribbean islands right now, and to speak to tornadoes, to speak to earthquakes, to speak to these devastating natural disasters. We just don't have anything that is quite on the level of what you see here. And when I moved here, somebody back home said, "Oh, be careful of those tornadoes," and I thought, yes, that's a terrifying thought. To this day, luckily, I've not really seen one. I think the worst I've seen is when those warnings go out, right, and you have to hide in your cupboard. That's probably the worst place to hide with all the detergent. But I did it anyway, because at least I'd stay clean, right? And it was a little nerve-wracking. I'll be truthful, though, it was quite exciting in many ways. I felt like I was in the film Twister, which should excite nobody. That was a very terrible film. But, yeah, to answer your question, it's a lot safer in that regard in the UK. I will definitely say that. Amy N, you're up next. Hi, Lawrence. I enjoy your channel. So do I, Amy. I prior watched some videos on YouTube commenting on England versus US differences, and the two that stuck with me were differences in pronouncing long numbers, right, and also the pattern of assignment of addresses, the address numbers. Specifically in London for the latter. Have you noticed this difference in pronunciation of numbers and their pattern of the address issue? Yes, I have. I think you're right to specifically point out London here, because it's quite oddly set up in terms of how the numbers are put together. So as you quite rightly say, on the odd side of things, you might have number 7, number 9, and then number 10. What's that all about? But I don't know that that's the case in most of the UK. Certainly where I grew up, it would be 41, 43, 45, and so on. And then across the road, you'd have the even numbers, just like here. One big difference is, though, we tend to cut the numbers off at a certain point, whereas in America, they can go into the tens of thousands, which is mental. But then again, everything's bigger in America, isn't it? I think we find. And you're right, the way we pronounce longer numbers, I think Americans tend more to saying 2100 to mean 2100 of something, right? And we will say the full thing, usually, 2100. So, yeah, it is an interesting way of looking at it. I think there's a whole video to be done on numbers, because, of course, we say the dates differently to each other and things like that. There are different times that we pronounce differently. Like I would say 8:30, and you would say 8:30. So, you won't hear me say this very often, but numbers are fascinating when it comes to these differences, and I think a whole video dedicated to that. It should be on like an important numbers day, like when is Pythagoras' birthday? We'll find that out and we'll do it then. That'll be meaningful. Thank you for your question, Amy. And the final question today, and this is definitely YouTube name of the week, Vittoriana Luisella asks, as a fellow Grimbarian, is there anything you really miss about Grimsby? Obviously not including your family and friends. I'm sure you miss them anyway, just a bit. Grimsby, anything I miss? I miss the old Weatherspoons where you could get a pint for $1.50, £1.50. See, I get my numbers and my units mixed up. I told you about this. Yeah, I miss that. I miss a lot of pubs. I miss going for walks by stinky fish factories. Lots of things, really. Grimsby Shopping Centre? No. Library. I miss the Grimsby Library. That was always a fun time on a Saturday night when you'd had some tequila. I'm kidding. I never did anything there. Don't read into that. That was a pun, read. Yeah, I just miss growing up there, really. Playing Indiana Jones in my back garden, climbing my mother's conifers, much to her chagrin. All of it, really. And good memories of my youth. And it's my home. It's where I grew up. So a lot of who I am now was informed by that place. So you've got Grimsby to blame. And that's it for this week's episode of Ask a Brit. And remember to subscribe to me here on YouTube. You can also go to lostinthepond.com and follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram to see really silly pictures of me. And other than that, have a great week and say hi to your friends. Bye.